And welcome to Likeable Science, and a special Monday edition. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Joining me today on Likeable Science is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, Ethan. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me today.
glad you could make it here, Jay. And today, we're going to talk about the 30-meter telescope. Now, there's a fun topic, something doubtless all of our audience knows about because it's been in the news so much recently. And part of the reason it's been in the news isn't just because it's an amazing and wonderful piece of technology that has astounding potential to expand our horizons, but because of the controversy that now surrounds it. The objections that are now, some would say belatedly, being raised about its very existence. So what's your overview on this?
I think the controversy actually doesn't include anything about the technology. The controversy is about Hawaiian culture. The controversy doesn't seem to cover any of the technology or the function or the, the scientific landscape in which this thing is being developed. Isn't it interesting how that works? Sometimes the news, gets skewed and they talk about the wrong thing. There was a very interesting comment the other day about the guy who landed the helicopter on the White House lawn.
Right.
Okay? And so everybody's got all this about the helicopter landing on the lawn and why didn't they shoot him and how long he's going to go for jail. But nobody said a word about why he did it. Do you recall?
He was making some sort of political statement.
He was making a statement.
Right.
But for some reason, the press never really played on that. They never really talked about what he did. And there's a very interesting comparison, I think, between that and this. I mean, he did it because he didn't like Citizens United and the money going through the PACs, and he thought you could buy votes in Congress. And, wow, I think you can buy votes in Congress. But he was trying to make a statement to the country rather than fly the helicopter on the lawn.
Right, and here with the 30-meter telescope, it is not, as you say, it's not the technology per se that anyone objects to. It's not that anyone's really opposed to us
looking into I don't think they're weighing and balancing the one against the other.
Right. To me, it seems more this is sort of an issue of how we handle, as a culture, how we handle big, expensive, time-consuming projects. What level of societal buy-in do we need, societal approval, and at what point can we still back out of those? And clearly, you don't want to build a system like that, get it all built, and then say, oh, no, people have decided we can't use it, and you stop. That's wasted time, wasted energy. And this 30-meter telescope went through quite a prolonged approval process, 7 years, 10 years, something like this. The people who were originally involved in it reached out to, they thought, certainly all the affected communities, talked to them, listened to them, got these communities approvals, built in aspects of the projects in terms of maintaining the sites on the mountains, maintaining the equilibria, cleaning out invasive species, preserving cultural landmarks and artifacts, and it sort of seemed like everything was all lined up.
Yeah, they had an EIS major, for 7 or 10 years, whatever it was. I remember ThinkTech was presenting a Hawaii Venture Capital Association luncheon, the Plaza Club, probably somewhere in there 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. And we wanted to cover this. So we brought in their development manager, who was a woman from, somewhere from the mainland, and she was hired by the consortium that is building this thing to explain, or rather to advance the process, the environmental process and all the process around getting a permit. And she came and spoke for an hour about exactly how that worked. And she said she'd been through this in a number of places, and she was prepared to dot every I and cross every T, and she would do that. And she really didn't think there'd be a problem because people would recognize how very important the science is and how important it is to Hawaii. And from that point forward, I was impressed that she was so confident, because my reaction was, does she really understand how things work in Hawaii? I mean, even then, it was pretty obvious that there were people out there that would stop any project because it was moving. So how do you find a project, that people would stop in Hawaii? Well, because it's moving. Make it stop moving. So anyway, I was kind of interested to see how she presented it, and she was very confident. And then we didn't hear much about it, for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, it all seemed to be moving, although I began to wonder at the end of that period, how come there's no controversy? How come nobody's raising a stink? In the media, they just seem to be doing it, although it's taking a really long time. And the controversy only started recently.
Right. That's, to me, the puzzling aspect. And again, I cannot claim any expertise in Hawaiian culture and the way Hawaii works as a state to do business in, but it does seem to me this is sort of very post facto. If all the permitting was done and no one's really saying that the corners were cut or that the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted, everyone sort of agrees that was all done according to process and
yeah, I'm sure it was.
Right.
I mean, judging by what she said, and I have every reason to believe that she was a professional. She handled telescope applications for permits all over the world and all over the country. And so when she said she was going to dot every I, cross every T, she was serious. And so, a reasonable assumption, especially in view of the silence that followed, is that, they had applied, they'd done an EIS as opposed to the trouble with the super ferry. They'd done it all. They invited people to public meetings over and over and over and over again. And, they got through their process according to law, and the people who made the decision as to whether it had been according to law decided, yes, it was, and gave them a permit. And it was only a few months ago, I guess. And there was really no significant controversy. So now we have a major controversy. What does this tell us?
Well, the one thing it tells me is that, and it's sort of odd, but that science does not operate in a vacuum. Every science investigation that happens is nested in a culture somewhere, and it springs from a culture and it has to.
Not in Chile. No, really. When this was all starting, the competition for this particular telescope was in Chile, on the top of a mountain in a completely isolated remote spot. That was a favorite of the astronomers. And it's a very good mountain. It's probably not as good as, Mauna Kea, in the sense that, as one guy put it, in Mauna Kea, you can drive down the mountain and get a beer. There are creature comforts there, and you can have a community of people who actually connect with the community in Mauna Kea. But in Chile, there are a bunch of scientists on the top of a mountain. They got to bring their own beer. It's different. But it could have gone there, and had it gone there would have been nobody to say a word about it. There was no culture. It was an isolated mountain, 10, 15,000 feet high, which nobody, maybe but the Chilean government, cared about, because they issued the permit. And they would have issued it here. They would have been perfectly happy to issue it here. But we decided, or the consortium decided, they wanted Mauna Kea instead.
Yeah, and there are. I mean, there are clearly issues to be raised, and this mountain clearly has meaning, significance to Native Hawaiians. But again, presumably all that was dealt with, right? And again, presumably part of its significance was that the mountain represented, in some sense, something beyond this planet, sort of expanding of Hawaii's horizons, in some sense, a pathway to the heavens in some.
We haven't really talked about what TMT does, and what the level of technology is. I take a whack at it, but you can correct me. It's TMT stands for 30-meter telescope. 30 meters means the mirror of the telescope is 30 meters wide, and that's about 90 feet wide, and it's one of the biggest, if not at the time it was designed, which was 10 years plus ago. That was the widest mirror of anywhere in the world. And P.S., when I say a mirror, it's not one piece of glass, because you can't do that. It's sections, and the sections are designed, with sophisticated optics, so that they work together as one mirror, and they're all controllable. Software controls exactly how each sub-mirror of this larger mirror work. Very sophisticated stuff. And when you get a collective surface area of 30 meters, you can see much further than any telescope before that. And so this was, at the time they first came on scene, the most advanced telescope in the world, and that's why they wanted to find a good home for it, whether it be Hawaii or Chile. You know, I think you have to take note of that, because we have a reputation worldwide for Mauna Kea. IFA, the Institute for Astronomy at UH, is a world-renowned place for astronomy.
Right.
Among other things, you know, people far away, half a world away, think of us in terms of astronomy and our advanced technology.
Exactly.
And for a long time, since I guess way before the Second World War, we have been engaged in astronomy and known for astronomy.
Right. We built certainly one of the very strongest astronomy communities around.
We have.
Is centered here. Right.
And not only in terms of the telescopes, but in terms of the academics and the intellectuals. They're world class. I mean, they come from everywhere. If you go to IFA, it's on Woodlawn Drive, it's not in the campus per se, you will meet people from everywhere in the world who are part of their faculty. It's a world-class faculty, and what we have on Mauna Kea is a world-class, you know, community of telescopes. There are 12 of them right now that have been built over a long period of time. They do get old in terms of the technology, so some of them probably should be phased out or are being phased out. And you have to move, you know, down the road in terms of renewing them and you know, getting them up to the standard of current technology. So I don't think people really appreciate how important Hawaii is in the global scene. The other thing is that telescopes once were handled by one party, one university, for example. University of California has been heavily involved in this, builds the telescope, and they get money, you know, from their own funds and from corporations that may want to help them out and so forth. But as time goes by, these telescopes have gotten much more expensive because of the technology, the size of the mirrors, the sophistication of the way the mirrors work, and all of the optics and software involved. It's big business. And so instead of costing millions, they cost billions. Right. And the one that's this TMT now is supposed to be close to $2 billion just in terms of the hardware. You know, say nothing about all the other things that are involved. And so this is a huge endeavor, and for that reason, it's very important to astronomy. It's very important to Hawaii as a home for astronomy, and it's very important to the community of people around that would participate in the enterprise. And I suppose you could say it's very important to the world and humanity.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, that's on the one side of the balancing act that you described. On the other side is some activists who do not necessarily represent the entire Native Hawaiian, you know, population or group. Only last year, OHA, which is a Hawaiian organization, said they supported the TMT, and they didn't take a position against it. But now a certain number of activists have gelled. After watching this proceeding going on for 10 years, they have decided now it's time to oppose it. After the permit's been granted, and they come around, and so the question is, you know, how much credence do you give them? What legal rights do they have to stop this permit when, you know, the Hawaiian activist community or rather the Native Hawaiian community, had the opportunity over a long time to make objection, and ultimately by not making objection went along with it, and now somebody is really stirring it up.
And we're going to follow that line of questions when we come back from our first break here. You're here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today is Jay Fidell, and we're talking about the 30-meter telescope and the controversy surrounding it. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
And you're back here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. With me today in the ThinkTech studios is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. We're talking about the controversy surrounding the 30-meter telescope. And as we phased out our last session, Jay was raising questions about the sort of who is this who has raised these objections? What are their sort of credentials? Who do they really represent? And indeed, it appears there's actually, I'm seeing now, in a small way at least, some reaction to the reaction, as it were. That is, there are people now, Native Hawaiians, objecting to the objections, saying that saying sort of what you were saying. The process has been done. Everyone agreed. It was all clean. It was done pretty well. And let's move ahead. And it's part of my. I've read a very moving piece by an 18-year-old student who basically said, I want this here. I want to be able to have it. I want to be able to learn from it. Yeah.
In the paper yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is serious business. We had a program. You were there last Thursday on offshore investment, and indeed, the way these telescopes are funded is by consortia.
Sure.
And they have usually telescope companies, universities all over the world will chip in and raise the billions that are necessary to do any telescope, and it's all over the world. It's from for example, Japan is involved, Europe is involved, they're all involved. And so this is important for global research, for global technology, and that's the way the funds are raised. But if they come to Hawaii and they find that people don't want it, make it wait, we make people wait 10 years just for starters.
Sure.
I remember the first Mililani housing project took 40 years for permitting, 40 years, because of all the opposition to it. This case, we're 10 years. But anyway, so they have to raise the money on the idea that, yes, the project can get done.
Right.
If they go to their constituents and say, well, how about throwing in $500 million, and the constituent says, will the project get done? After all, that's Hawaii. And Forbes calls Hawaii the Republic of Hawaii. And there really is no rule of law in Hawaii. And so you can go through this whole process thinking that you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and following the law, and then it gets reversed on you. I am not going to give you any more money, not for Hawaii.
Right, that is sort of the big problem here is if this falls apart in some sense at this point, it's a black eye for Hawaii. It's also bad for science, of course.
Black eyes for Hawaii.
Right. This kind of thing has happened before. The classic case, I think, was down in Texas, the superconducting super collider, right? They went so far as they had broken ground. They were digging the tunnels. They were doing all this, and then finally, the whole project just got canceled and became, nothing. And they had invested, I forget how many billions of dollars in that project already, and one cannot help but believe that hurt Texas to some extent.
Well, in an interesting comparison, the medical school has a research building, and the research building included a space for a guy named Dwayne Gubler, who was a world-renowned infectious diseases scientist. And he was going to build what they called an RBL, a Regional Biosafety Laboratory. It's very high safety. It has to be vacuum packed and all that. And he had raised $50 million between local funding and NIH funding, and he was ready to build it. But there was objection, people who didn't like pathogens in their midst, I guess. And they opposed it. And one day, David McLean, the president of the university, called NIH, and he canceled it without telling Gubler.
Wow.
Gubler, you can imagine, was the principal investigator, said, I'm out of here. And he immediately took a job with Duke in Singapore, where they gave him all the money and all the researchers he'd ever wanted. Now, this did not actually hit the paper. But the point is, we had this enormous world-class, scientific and medical enterprise. We were all ready to go, all funded. Everything was in place. And we pulled it for reasons that are still not clear or even discussed. And that's similar to Texas, isn't it?
Yes, I never knew the inside scoop on why the SSC got canceled. I think people basically saw the budget on it continuing to grow astronomically, and eventually realized that nobody wanted to keep forking out the bucks over
It's
the
not the
long
money
term.
here, though.
Right.
As in Googler's project, the money is all raised for TMT. They're ready to go.
Right.
They got the permit, they got the money, the expertise, they got a market of scientists around the world who want to see this, who would participate in it, who would pay for slices of time to use this telescope.
Exactly. Now with the medical school, you can understand people's concerns about dropping a biosafety lab level 3 or 4 in the middle of a densely packed urban area. That's certainly a reasonable concern.
that's
Say,
a
hey,
reasonable concern.
we don't know that we're so comfortable having smallpox stored right next to us, and
This was
blah,
in
blah,
the
blah.
day of SARS. Well, it was still in the time of SARS,
Right.
don't you think? H1N1,
Yeah.
was it? And, we were at a crossroads in the Pacific, a crossroads of
Right.
transportation and tourism. We
Right.
could have an incurable virus off China or whatever right here in a matter of days, and it would be a scourge on the population. But we really have no laboratory to deal with that.
Right, I was
to
gonna say.
identify it or to
It's-
work vaccines or anything.
Right, you can make the argument very strong that we should have such a lab just because of our position,
Yeah.
equally as you can make the argument that no, we shouldn't have it because
We don't.
because we're
We
so
don't have to
isolated.
send it somewhere else, and how many
Right.
days we lose before someone else who doesn't care as much
Right.
would help us solve this problem.
Right.
I mean, this is one of those great risks for Hawaii that we brought on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so on the TMT, you got a balance between whatever cultural arguments the current activists make, many of whom, were not even bar mitzvah at the time the telescope was first announced. Back they were, say 10 years younger. They didn't know anything about this, and they wouldn't have been able to, connect up the arguments to oppose it. Now they're on Dole Street, parading around with signs. And okay, but is it the right time for that? I mean, maybe we should parade around signs for something that happened in 20 or 30 years ago,
Right.
too. When does the door close?
Right.
When is a permit not a permit? Maybe we should take down some stuff. If you don't like the medical school that was built 15 years ago, hey, let's take it down.
Well, yeah, and then you look again in the Middle East, for instance, the Islamic State people are taking down archaeological sites that they don't like. They believe are essentially against their fundamental beliefs about how the world ought to run. And to me, I think that's virtually, that's a hideous crime. But
I think, some people believe that the cultural value of the mountaintop here is so important that it trumps all of this science. Doesn't matter what telescopes are up there or what telescopes do or how they affect the economy of Hawaii or the academic activities and reputation of Hawaii. I don't care about that. The cultural considerations trump all that. And they trump the law. That's the interesting part. They trump the rule of law, which these guys followed.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what happened before. We are living at a time when culture, the host culture, trumps the law. That really leaves it in a kind of fragmented
well, yeah,
legal arrangement.
because culture is first it's amorphous, and second it's dynamic, right? Culture changes over time, and you can't say everything about this culture is great and good and should always be preserved for all time, right?
And the culture is changing. There's a lot of assimilation going on
Right.
as we speak.
Yeah, even Hawaiian culture changed some, and it had some aspects that we would no longer consider appropriate. They did not, for instance, when they've broken ground for the TMT, choose to bury people in each of the post holes, which was apparently as I understand it, an ancient Hawaiian cultural ideal that you did.
I'll tell you what, though, I would say, see if you agree, that if the activists today could find some flaw in the procedure, okay, by which TMT got its permit, and therefore raised that as a legal issue, or if it was raised because TMT went ahead with construction and they wanted to stop construction, right? That would be a moment for the legal issue to be raised. Then it would go to the state Supreme Court. And the question is whether the Supreme Court would be, would follow the rule of law as we all understand it to be, the permitting process, or whether they would find that some flaw or some point about which the cultural issues trump the existing process. We stand a fair chance of having the whole thing stopped, even though the world thought these guys were doing the right thing for 10 years. So, you know, really, if I were in Wall Street and somebody said, hey, how about another 500 million or billion for investment in Hawaii, I would really wonder if I should do that. It sounds like China, not even China today, China 20 years ago, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole issue as you build these legal systems, particularly more and more complex, it becomes harder and harder to follow every single rule and regulation, because oftentimes you may have regulations that insist that you do one thing and equally valid regulations that insist you do exactly the opposite, in which case, you know, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So, you know, at some point, the process could become so complex that yes, you could always find a flaw in it. That somewhere somebody didn't sign something that had to, but we don't want to get into that, you know, that kind of thing, because any project can be stopped. The issue, sort of, I think, is how do we move forward from this, right? How do we continue to build Hawaii's reputation as a place where, yes, science and technology can be done, where offshore investment is welcome, and yet where cultural values are respected and dealt with in a reasonable and sensible way, right?
Well, one way that you don't do is you don't get on there on the top of the mountain, as the governor recently did, and said, well, a lot of noise about this, I think I'll stop it.
Right.
And by fiat, forget about the permitting process, I'll stop it.
Right.
And he stopped it without a plan. And he said he was going to look at it. That was really a dead end. That was where the ever-ready battery just drives itself into the wall without a plan. And everyone knew, really, that in a week's time, he'd have to reverse himself, or it would collapse for no reason at all. And so that's what happened. But it leaves us with this very amorphous situation where you can stop it for no reason.
Right.
Then you have to, for whatever period of time you feel, you know, they feel is appropriate, and then you have to turn around and eat your own edict. So we really need some predictability here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all the public officials involved have to see that. They think that capital will, this is back to the program last Thursday, they think that capital will find a way here. They'll beat a path to our door, and there'll always be guys with big checkbooks that want to invest in Hawaii. It isn't necessarily so.
No, without predictability, you can, as a matter of fact, bet strongly against it, right? I mean, unless there is some real predictability, and by predictability, that's not certainty. We understand, you know, you can be doing a project and the whole situation around you changes. Suddenly your project, for whatever reason, may have some unexpected danger of it, or a side effect has now shown up that's terrible and life-threatening to everyone around, or whatever. That's understandable. Then you sort of have to stop and say, hey, let's stop in light of this new information. Let's look at this again and see if we still want to move forward.
That's not the case,
but no one's done it here, right? There isn't any new issue.
No,
there
this
isn't anyone
culture point is 500 years old.
Right, there isn't anyone saying the process was flawed. There isn't, it's very peculiar. It's just like, we don't like it. And so I keep getting back to
we thought we didn't like it this much, now we think we don't like it that much. I mean, it tells you a lot about where we're going on Hawaiian culture issues. You know, we covered, in fact, it's playing right now, a show down the block at Kumukuhua called Kaiulani. Kaiulani was written in sort of in the blush of Hawaiian activism in 1987, right around the time, I guess, no, it was after the development of OHA and all that. But it was at a time when people were first becoming aware of these cultural issues on a larger scale, with a nostalgic wish to return to these cultural issues, and it was a wonderful play, and it's playing right now, and it really makes you tear up. It's all about how Kaiulani was sent to England for an education, befitting a queen, and she returned to find an overthrow and no throne for the queen. It really touches everybody who watches it, and you know, that kind of return to the events of the day, understanding the basis on which this society and the host culture have developed is really important for everybody. But to stop projects just for the sake of stopping projects is not within that approach. That's different. And I think we have to look forward, not backward. We have to get together. We have to avoid this kind of polarization, which this reflects. It reflects a polarization. And we have to work together for the benefit of all the people, all the state. And that includes the activists, it includes OHA, it includes Kamehameha schools, it includes the legislature. We have to get together on things.
Absolutely.
And certainly Molokai. We have to get together on things.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about moving forward when we come back. Right now, we're going to take a short break. You're here on Likeable Science. I'm talking with Jay Fidell about the 30-meter telescope and the controversy surrounding it. We'll be back after a short break.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidell and the ThinkTech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we'd love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
And you're back on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. Here in the ThinkTech studios with me is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. Jay and I are talking about the 30-meter telescope and the controversy that surrounds it and how this sort of represents and ties into larger issues of investment in Hawaii and how Hawaii is supposed to move forward. We were talking before the break about the different factions and the need to bring people together, and there's got to be some ways to do that, Jay. There's got to be. We're not all adamantly opposed to one another. The communities that are involved here, the stakeholder groups, are not that far apart, are they?
Well, I think one interesting point here is that theoretically the state, which represents us all,
Right.
has a government,
Right.
and therefore a governor. And it has, however you want to cast it, it has leadership. So somebody can speak on behalf of the state in general. The question is, who can speak, if anyone, on behalf of the activists, the Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian activist group? And there is nobody that I know, and I wish that they could designate somebody to speak for them, because then there could be a meaningful negotiation of this instead of this fragmented opposition. And maybe they can, if they do that, maybe we can have an easier time of it trying to find common ground. The other, because if you find common ground with one person who pretends to be the leader but isn't, then the other fellow, that's not common ground for him. So you still have the same argument going on, and it never comes to an end. The other thing is, the natural knee-jerk, okay, for the university and for the consortia is, well, A, we should give a lot of jobs to local people, which they would anyway, which they have anyway. If you look at the other telescopes on top of the mountain, there's a lot of local hiring there, including management, which is good. So they ought to investigate that and see if that helps. The other thing is, what do you call it? Kind of give community benefits, build community facilities, make the community see in real terms that this kind of enterprise cares about the community and will help the community, in every way it can. The problem there is you can't just throw money at the community and spend millions and millions of dollars. And there have been discussions along these lines, which I don't think is a good idea, because it speaks of you can solve any problem, you can pave over any problem with money, and then what happens the next time one of these issues comes up? You need more money and more money. That's not a good solution. The best solution, I think, is to try to educate people about what the stakes really are, and to show them how the balance works, and to show them there's no disrespect here. It's just we're trying to find a solution that fits for everybody's needs. And just like you have a position, well, the other guy has a position. Nobody's completely wrong, and so maybe we can find common ground. And I think that's the way we have to go. It's education, and that's why we're having this discussion, isn't it?
Exactly. And there's a sort of a movement in science these days that points out, though, education is not the same as information. You can provide anyone all the information you want about why your project is good, why they should do it your way, blah, 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 and they can and often will still be opposed to that, and they won't hear you or won't believe you. A lot of the question comes in what they talk about framing, how you frame an issue, what context you place it on in. And I think that's, in a sense, how this needs to be moved ahead, is a bit that we all are sort of on the same page. We all do really want what's best for Hawaii, what's best for this state, what's best for the mountain, what's best for Hawaiian culture. recognizing that we live in the 21st century, things are moving ahead, science marches on, technological tools are needed. Given all these things, yes, how do we best now find common ground? And it's certainly not by sort of closing our eyes, covering our ears, and saying, no, 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 we're not going to have this, and trying to bring a halt to a project that was 10 years in the planning and development.
Right, and that's one of the issues in the offshore investment program last Thursday is, do we want progress? I think we have to decide that, all of us.
Absolutely.
And if we want progress, the people who stand in the way of progress really have to stand out of the way, because they're hurting everyone else.
Exactly. So, who gets to say what progress is, what progress we want, and how we'd make that decision? And those are the big questions.
Government. The government who is elected by us all.
Right, which is all of us. And that's how we're gonna out on that note, because we found some agreement here. So you've been watching Likeable Science here on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. Jay Fidell has joined me today, and we've been talking a little bit about the controversy of the 30-meter telescope. We hope you'll join Likeable Science every Friday at 1 p.m. Thanks a lot. Aloha.
I'm Donna Blanchard, and this is your ThinkTech Daily News for Monday, April 20th, 2015. A Libyan ship filled with migrant hopefuls from the Middle East and Africa sank in the Mediterranean yesterday. As many as 900 people are feared dead. Only 28 survivors have been found, and most are presumed trapped in the ship. As Italian rescue ships responded to the sinking, they received distress calls about a second migrant ship crashing near the Greek island of Rhodes. The Prime Minister of Malta, another island nation not far from the African coastline, called for global action to stabilize Libya. Speaking of the refugees, he said, "The amount of people we've seen coming and how it has been organized in the past few months is unprecedented." Since the civil war began 4 years ago, Europe has received hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from Africa and the Middle East. Italy's Navy and Coast Guard ships have rescued more than 130,000 people last year alone. European foreign ministers met in Luxembourg to discuss how to respond. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, is asking Europe to expand its rescue and patrol program, as well as the legal avenues for migration to Europe. War-torn Libya has become a haven for human smuggling rings along the African coastline. Today, prime ministers of Italy and Malta called for a targeted non-military intervention against Libya's human traffickers. Prime Minister Joseph Muscat of Malta and Prime Minister Matteo Renzi of Italy gave a news conference today at which Mr. Muscat said, "What happened on Sunday was a game changer. There is a new realization that if Europe doesn't act as a team, history will judge it very harshly, as it did when it closed its eyes to stories of genocide, horrible stories, not long ago." As the Saudi-led airstrikes in Yemen continue, a huge explosion that shattered windows miles away from the strike site is believed to have been the result of a bomb hitting a munitions cache. The site in the Faj Atan area of the capital, Sana'a, dozens of civilians are feared dead as wounded have been taken to a nearby hospital, and the search continues for survivors among the rubble. The stated objective of the Saudi-led and United States-supported airstrikes is to stop the Houthis, but along with military installations across the country, factories, gas stations, and residential neighborhoods have also been hit with airstrikes, according to witnesses and aid workers. The relief organization Oxfam said that the coalition had also bombed one of its storage facilities in Sana province. Oxfam says that the contents of that warehouse had no military value and that they have shared detailed information with the coalition on the locations of their offices and storage facilities. Here in Hawaii, protests against building the largest telescope in the world continue at the site of Mauna Kea. Support for the protests and protesters coming from around the islands and the world. Abigail Kawana'akawa, heiress to the Campbell estate fortune and a Li'i descendant, has given $25,000 to aid the protesters. That money is set to provide food and bail in some cases. Ms. Kawana'akawa says that the University of Hawaii, who owns the lease and leases the land to TMT Observatory Corporation, has been derelict in its management of the sacred site and should have professional, independent review. I'm Donna Blanchard, and this has been your ThinkTech Daily News for Monday, April 20th, 2015. Ahui ho.